Oh, hello. This is the penultimate one I'm doing on this book. This is 8 and um, Empire of Normality by Robert Chapman. And last time I was talking about, we'd moved on to the history of neurodiversity. This one's going to be quite a long one, and the last one will be a bit shorter. So bear with me. I'm just reading the notes that I wrote down from the book. And the diversity in neurodiversity comes from two sources. The first was the shift towards celebrating other forms of human diversity, cultural, sexual, and so forth, that arose following the major civil rights and pride movements of the 20th century. Early neurodiversity proponents began to ask whether neurological divergence could similarly be celebrated and be a focus of pride rather than being seen as an inherently tragic deviation. Neurodivergent people began to reclaim diagnostic classifications, autism, dyspraxia, and so on, to allow recognition of shared forms of disablement while resisting the idea that this disablement stemmed from individual dysfunction. The other that fits in very much with, I didn't realise how much had gone on before I was diagnosed, and when everybody celebrated, I thought, oh, that's, it definitely, and even before I read all this, I thought, it's the same, like people who are celebrating their sexuality and so forth. So you can come out as autistic as well. I've talked about that in another video, but the other source of diversity in neurodiversity was the shift towards viewing biodiversity as a vital part of what sustains broader ecosystems. This emerged in the 1960s as more scientists and activists became concerned with how capital's need to constantly consume natural resources for profit had led to the depletion of finite resources and the destruction of ecological equilibrium. By the 1990s, the idea that biodiversity should be valued and conserved had entered the more progressive elements of public consciousness, and it was this that Singer and Bloom extended to theorize the concept of neurological diversity. Bloom framed the concept as a challenge to the concept of the normal brain. The common assumption in cognitive studies was that in the human brain, the occasional bug was inevitable, hence autism and other departures from the neurological norm. Autistics suggested another way of looking at this. Neurodiversity may be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. That makes perfect sense to me and accords with what I believe. The shift was from viewing mental functioning as either normal or abnormal to viewing different minds as having different cognitive specializations within a broader cognitive ecosystem. The idea is that neurological diversity is vital for dealing with the complex problems that humanity will encounter in a constantly changing environment. It therefore doesn't make sense to eliminate neurodivergence, as it would impede our collective functioning. Singer suggested the neurodiversity movement would work towards an ecological society that would foster inclusion for autistic people. Generally, for humanity to flourish, we need to both conserve diversity and to support divergence. In stark contrast to the Galtonian tradition, which was mentioned in one of the earlier videos, which suggested the abnormal needed to be pushed towards the norm, Singer suggested that divergence itself was part of what constituted healthy neurological functioning. Singer wasn't without criticism, though. She limited her analysis to what she called high-functioning autism. This left those autistic people who fell further from neuronormative standards back in an individualized medical model. Her analysis retained some of the ranking system of the pathology paradigm, again mentioned earlier, and thus excluded many autistic people who found a neurodiversity approach helpful and wanted to be included. Her analysis didn't therefore go far enough. Nick Walker proposed a paradigm shift in neurodivergent liberation. While neurodiversity theory has always been developed collectively, Walker is one of the foundational neurodiversity theorists alongside Singer. Walker clarified the core differences between the pathology paradigm and the neurodiversity paradigm. Walker is also a descendant of Jewish Holocaust survivors who grew up in poverty as an undiagnosed autistic. She was also an outsider student engaged in activist communities and online autistic groups. She honed her political views as a teenager, involved in queer and anti-fascist activism in the 1980s, at a time when AIDS academics worsened discrimination against the queer community. Yeah. Later, I'll talk about something else related to that in another one. There's no time in this one. Later, new terms had begun to emerge, including neurodivergent and neurominority, as additions to the concept of neurotypicality and neurodiversity. Walker's conception of the neurodiversity paradigm indicated a need for a new set of fundamental assumptions and principles that could form the basis of how we think about, study and respond to human diversity. She claimed that the pathology paradigm starts from the assumption that significant divergences from dominant sociocultural norms of cognition and embodiment represent some form of deficit, defect or pathology. This paradigm divides the spectrum of cognitive embodied performance into normal and other than normal, with normal as the implicitly privileged as the superior and desirable state. The neurodiversity paradigm starts from the understanding that neurodiversity is an axis of human diversity, like ethnic diversity or diversity of gender and sexual orientation, and is subject to the same sorts of social dynamics as those other forms of diversity, including the dynamics of social power inequalities, privilege and oppression. If we adopt this approach, instead of dividing groups into the normal and the pathological, we can instead frame them as having closer or further proximity to the neurotypical ideal. Analogous to the shift from viewing homosexuality as a mental disorder to reframing it as a minority sexual orientation. Walker's paradigm quickly caught on among neurodivergent activists, but we are unlikely to fully supplant the pathology paradigm while the capitalist global economic order remains dominant. Neurodiversity proponents argue that variations in mental functioning are like biodiversity, and it takes more than just neurotypical minds for groups or even society as a whole to function. This is directly opposed to Nazi ideology, which saw society as an organisation that required uniformity of all its constituent parts. Neurodiversity holds that society requires diversity and demands society to support neurodivergence rather than eliminating it. So I find that very interesting and very enlightening and illuminating, and I hope you do too. So I'll just do the final one next time, but as I say, if you want to read more, there's that book, but probably lots of others. I have not read Nick Walker or Judy Singer. They're just referenced in this book by Robert Chapman. Thanks for watching and listening today. Bye.